Testing. Am I too loud? Hey, hi, how are you? Eric?
Good. Not sure where.
Oh, it's turned off.
Sorry.
Testing, 1, 2. Ooh, I'm squeaking, Paul. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Restore 2024, Mattering, Being Valued, and Valuing Others. Welcome to St. Philip the Deacon Lutheran Church in Plymouth, Minnesota. Thank you for all joining us here in the sanctuary. And also thank you for all of you who are joining us online and those that will be joining us in the future because you're watching the Timberwolves win tonight. Go Wolves, and yes, Minnesota can have nice things. So we're excited about that. And some people will be watching us on some of our other media platforms. You have questions about that, you can check with our church. Bless our time here together as we gather in your presence, God. As Matthew says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in your name, I am with you also. Thank you for the opportunity today to learn and develop tools to help us and to help others, help us navigate this world. Amen. How did you guys get here today? how did we get here today? And I'm going to give you a little background on how we ended up with the talk on mattering. It's kind of a weird word, isn't it? Mattering. Well, in 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General issued an advisory for isolation, an epidemic of isolation. And in that epidemic, he also issued a healing effects of social connection and community in response to research citing we are in an epidemic that approximately half of the U.S. adults report experiencing loneliness, with some of the highest rates among our young people. Isolation and lack of healthy, strong connections are cited as strong factors in this epidemic of loneliness. Lack of social connections was found to be as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day and decreasing your life expectancy and quality of life. So that's why we're here at St. Philip. We figured we're a community organization and we can help with this epidemic. There are three main factors that the reports have signaled out for connection, and one is structure. So what do you think structure is? Structure is the number of relationships, variety of relationships, and frequency of interaction with others. Now think about that with the connections you have, or maybe your neighbor. Function is the second one, the degree in which others can be relied upon for various needs. And that's part of connections too. How many people do you rely on, and can you rely on them? Quality, the degree in which relationships and interactions with others are positive, helpful, and satisfying. And that's what we want to focus on, and that's what, as during Mental Health Awareness Month, which is May, SPD has been focusing on the quality factor of social connection. Through our Restore 2024, we are presenting you with foundational tools to fill up your toolkit and help you flourish and restore in your connections with others. Handouts on building your coping toolkit are available on the desk outside. They're also available at all the entry hospitality desks at St. Philip the Deacon. And it's listed under parish nurse handouts that you can see. So check those. There's also stress balls on our mental health awareness table that we've had out all month, in case you feel like you need a little stress. I didn't bring one up here, I probably should have. Everybody should have picked up today Casey's PowerPoint, and also this lovely piece of floss. And no, it is not dental floss, it's embroidery floss, and we'll use it at the end of the program, so don't lose it. So today, Wednesday, May 22nd, Casey Erickson is here. She has a master's and will be speaking on being valued and valuing others. She is a mental health therapist, teacher, and professor at Bethel University in St. Paul, with specialties in trauma, interpersonal wholeness, and intentional living. Casey is passionate about helping people integrate mental health and spirituality. So she's a perfect speaker for us today. She will explore the need for deep connections with others, which we just kind of explained, and for helping each individual feel valued for who they are deep inside, whether it's in your workplace, whether it's in your home, whether it's in your school, whether it's in your neighborhood, or another community organization. We hope these learning opportunities that SPD has made available for you will begin to ripple, a ripple of healing in our community and our country as we sharpen our tools and learn new tools to increase the quality of our connections with those we love and that we are surrounded by. And with that, I would love to introduce our speaker, Casey Erickson. Thank you, Casey, for coming.
All right. Can you hear me? Is this working? Yes, awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. I know, again, I'm competing against Minnesota sports as they're doing very well, which we don't always get. So I'm glad that you are all here and you made a point to come tonight. And I'm so grateful that there are congregations like St. Philip that prioritize topics like this and see the value and the importance of talking about things of this nature. So it's a joy and honor to be here tonight with all of you. The topic of mattering. When I first heard about this topic, and when someone referred to it as more than just like a word, but instead a concept or a framework, I was honestly a little confused. And in my mind, I was like, this seems too simple or too intuitive almost to believe that this is like, how can you make a whole framework out of the idea of mattering? And as I learned, I realized to some degree I was right. It really is a fairly simple concept. It's about feeling valued and valuing others. And I quickly realized that the implications of this topic are far-reaching, and there's a difference between knowing that we should feel valued and actually practically feeling that within ourselves. So this topic is going beyond just psychology. It's really starting to pick up. It's being talked about in sociology, economics, politics, all of these different areas. A few weeks back, actually, I was working on this topic at my local library where I go to get more focused. I have kids at home, so it's like my escape place to have some quiet. Now, I was supposed to be working on it. I was instead procrastinating and roaming the shelves of the books. And I looked at this book that was on their display shelf. And it was, I honestly don't remember the title of it. It was some book on workplace culture. And so I picked it up and flipped it open and landed on a chapter about mattering, which was a good reminder to me to go back to work and get focused. But it also proves the point that this is really starting to pick up, and people are seeing the importance and the difference it makes when people feel valued in their relationships and also in their organizations and workplaces. So tonight, my hope is that you will leave feeling a renewed passion and interest and desire to tend to your own selves and say, no, I am worth something, I have value, as well as feeling a renewed interest in loving those around you in a way where they truly feel like they matter as well. So for our time together, I'm going to start and we'll dive into the concept. What is mattering? What are some of the implications? How do we form beliefs within ourselves? As Susan said, I do a lot of work with trauma, so you'll hear that go through my time here of how trauma creates negative beliefs within us. And so that'll be my first part. And then the second part will turn more towards the practical pieces. What does it mean to develop a feeling of value within our own selves, doing that internal work, and how do we help other people feel value and interact with them in a way that show that they matter to us? Sound good? So to begin, I want to offer a definition. This is a very simple definition. It comes from, his name's Gordon Flett. He is a psychology researcher, professor. Thank you, turning down the lights. And he defines it as mattering is a personal sense of feeling significant and valued. Fairly simple, right? So this is the definition I want you to hold in your mind as we go through tonight, that this is what we mean when we say mattering. However, I would be amiss if I did not offer Gordon Flett's longer explanation that he gives on mattering. So this is in your handouts. I'm gonna read it all. Bear with me, it's a long quote, but it has just so many good nuggets in it that I want to make sure we spend time on it. So he says, quote, "The person who feels like he or she matters is someone who feels important, visible, and heard, while the person who feels like he or she does not matter to others feels unimportant, invisible, and unheard. Mattering is a vital construct and a key psychological resource that is central to the human condition. Indeed, the individual person who lives his or her life devoid of a sense of mattering to others will lack the basic sense of personal significance, human connectedness, which is what Susan was getting at earlier too, right? Human connectedness and social acceptance required to thrive and flourish. In contrast, the person who feels a persistent sense of mattering unconditionally to significant others will have a key inner resource that fuels positive responses to life challenges. It makes a big difference, right? To pay attention to that. A person's ability to feel like they matter will determine a person's ability to thrive and flourish in this life. That's a big claim, that this sense of feeling valued can lead to personal flourishing, or the opposite of that, to not have a sense of being valued by those around us or within our own selves will lead to a lack of flourishing and thriving. So when I read this, my mind immediately goes to, well, this is great that we have this longing, right? It's clear we all have this longing to matter in our lives. Where does that longing come from? And why should we listen to it? Why does it matter that we have that longing? Why prioritize that natural instinct that we have? And so just a few thoughts to go through. First of all, from a very biological perspective, you can look at the instinct to matter. There's actually a term called mattering instinct that was coined by an author by the name of Rebecca Goldstein. It's really interesting. She coined this term mattering instinct actually in a novel. It was one of her characters that came up with this, which I just think is kind of a cool side point. But it really got taken and ran with. Like, other researchers are starting to think about it from this character in this novel. So Rebecca Goldstein, through her character, says, if an organism, any organism, were to have the capacity to articulate its deepest motivation, the motivation that's a prerequisite for all other motivations that drive it on in its ceaseless tasks and activities, its scurrying, hiding, roaming, raiding, mating, it would say that its own existence in this world, its persistence and its flourishing matters. Basically, we have this biological need down to the smallest organism, right? Think about the microbes in our body, for example. There's a drive to survive. And if something wants to survive, they have to believe that they matter. Otherwise, why try to survive, right? And the same goes for us as humans. So again, this is just a biological lens. This is if someone, doesn't have any interest in religion or believing that there's something more to this existence, if they just want to view it through a biological lens, this in itself is enough reason to care about creation, to care about other creatures, to justify human rights, right? To say, oh, there's a drive to survive, therefore there's an instinct that you want to matter, and so we should treat people as if they matter. However, we are here in the church. And so as Christians, we get to add in this entirely another layer to this conversation that personally I think adds so much more depth and warmth and beauty to the conversation that we're having tonight of why we should matter, why listen to, where do we get this longing to matter? So consider the creation story, right? God creates and says, this is good. And then God creates humans and says, oh, this is very good. That is God speaking value into God's creation. And that in itself is like, oh, can we believe that, right? Can we believe for ourselves that God actually created the world, created all of us, and said, you are good, you have value, purely because I designed you and I made you. And is that enough for us to say, okay, yeah, we have value, other people have value? But then you can add in the idea of the Imago Dei, that we are made in the image of God, and the image of a very good God at that. In the resources of additional resources, I included the book Adam by Henry Nouwen. I'm not sure if that's a familiar one to any of you. But it's a beautiful book. It's one of Henry Nouwen's, I believe it might have been his last book he wrote before he died. And it's his time at the L'Arc community where he worked with a man named Adam who had a severe mental disability, who really couldn't communicate or interact in really any way. And people would tell Henry Nouwen, like, you're wasting your time. You should be spending your last years doing all of these incredible things. And basically the book gets at Henry Nouwen's own journey of saying, I matter. He doesn't use that language, but that he has a sense of value and that he matters, whether he's writing books and doing all the incredible things that Henry Nouwen did in his life, or if he is working with a single man and loving Adam. And in the same way that Adam has value, no matter what Adam is giving back to the world, right? And so this idea that we are made in the image of God, and no matter what we do, no matter who we are, what we provide the world, we have value simply because we are made in the image of God. And God says we have value in God's image. So this will be the foundation we will work on, right? We matter because we are told we were created and we have value. And as Christians, we get to hold that deeply and beautifully within us. So why does mattering matter? Why is it a big deal that St. Philip's is having this conversation, especially in the month of mental health awareness? And all that Susan even shared about the loneliness epidemic, all of these things, people are struggling. So the research correlations between a sense of mattering, there's a ton of different correlations. So research is suggesting that people who feel like they matter experience more self-compassion, relational satisfaction, better mental health, greater belief in their capacity to achieve their goals, and more on. And again, the opposite holds true as well. So people who have a lack of mattering, there's an association with burnout, self-criticism, anxiety, depression, aggression, acting out, and increased risk of suicide. And so to look at the general landscape of mental health, because clearly there's a correlation here, right? Between do people feel like they matter and are they able to flourish and thrive? Or do they feel like they don't matter and are they having all of these struggles in their life? To pause and note, I'm not just referring to them out there, right? This is also relevant for us here in the church as well, to not pretend that just because we are in the church that none of us experience this, right? Reality check for us. But just a few statistics to put out there. First of all, 1 in 8, so about 12.5% of the world lives with a mental disorder. And that isn't including people who have gone undiagnosed. So many people don't seek out treatment and therefore wouldn't be included in this diagnosis. It's about 20% of adults in the United States that have been diagnosed with a mental disorder. Shrinking down to Minnesota, it's also about 20%. That remains true here in our state. And then the percentages are generally similar for children, 15 to 20%. However, some surveys range as high as almost 50%, especially in the teen population. Mental health crisis is just on the rise with teenagers. And I mean, there's a bunch of speculation about why that is. And I would argue that if teens feel like they matter, no matter the success or whatever, all the pressure that teenagers feel nowadays, or all the lack of connection that they may have because of technology or whatever it is, right, can puts them at higher risk for these mental health concerns. And so while I'm not claiming that if people could just magically feel like they matter, everything would be resolved, I'm not quite ready to make that extreme of a claim. It's clear this correlation in how if we could prioritize helping people feel valued and seen and heard and important, how this could really have major impact in the mental health realm. The same goes true with if we believe other people matter. So I've been talking as if, if we can believe we matter internally, then it can decrease mental health. But the same goes true if we start to believe that other people matter, it impacts how we treat them. And in reverse, when we feel like people don't matter, that's where you see all sorts of, evil and violence that humans inflict on others. It always starts with thinking that people, whether it's an individual or a group of people, are somehow less valuable than ourselves, right? Come on. Sorry, give me one moment. There we go. All right, so I'm going to pause and offer a case study. This is an example of a client that I personally see in my therapy practice. I've adjusted information dramatically to protect her own identity, and yet the emotional experience will remain true. And I offer this for a couple reasons. One, I'm going to use it throughout the rest of our time together to kind of highlight certain examples, but also I think it's important for us to keep grounded as we have this conversation of what is it like in real life? What does this topic look like in someone's real story? So I'm going to introduce you to, I'm going to call her Sophia. Again, not her real name. Sophia is a mid-20s young female who lives here in the Twin Cities by herself. Her family all lives out of state, so she moved here for school and work. She got accepted recently into law school, and so she's this just brilliant young woman, and the type of person where you're just naturally compelled to, right? She's brilliant and funny and beautiful and just so likable when you meet her. And so on the surface, she is it seems like she's thriving, like she's flourishing, right? And yet she came to me initially because of high levels of anxiety and depression and what very clearly became severe childhood trauma in her life. So Sophia grew up with a father who was physically, emotionally abusive to her and her siblings and her mom. Her mom was very emotionally unstable and not very present, and still is often to this day a lot of the work we do. And Sophia had numerous younger siblings who she was basically told, it's your job to protect them. So later in life, her parents got divorced, and they would still have visitations with her dad, and she'd be there. And basically, she was told by her mom, stay up all night. Make sure that your dad doesn't do anything to your younger siblings. It's on you to make sure that they're safe. Basically, deny all your own needs, including literally a 7-year-old who needs sleep, right? These physical needs, deny your needs, deny yourself, put your own thoughts aside in order to help your family or to tend to mom's emotional needs or dad's emotional needs in those moments. So when Sophia came to me, I never used language about mattering with her, but she said to me, Casey, I do not matter. Flat out, use those words with me. And so I'm using her as an example because it's such a clear example. And yet so many clients that I see, if you take layer after layer of symptoms and pain and suffering away, usually what you see at the core bottom is this sense of, I'm not good, I'm not worthy, I'm not enough, I don't matter. Those beliefs that sit at the core of us really seep their way out. So I'll return to her and use her throughout our time together, yes, as someone to ground us in what this actually looks like. So how are beliefs created, right? If this belief is I don't matter or I do matter, how are those beliefs there within us? How we start. I firmly believe as babies, we start believing that we matter. You think of an infant, grandchildren, right, that, or your own kids that they cry because they're uncomfortable, or they cry because they're hungry, and they cry because they expect someone to come fix it for them, right? I'm putting words in their little mouths, but it's this sense of, hey, I matter, so I'm going to vocalize this and I expect that someone's going to see me and tend to my needs, right? And so I really do think we're born with this innate instinct that we matter. Unfortunately, we are often told otherwise throughout our lives, or you take extreme cases of neglect. That's why young infants with neglect, severe neglect, stop crying, right? They no longer cry because they quickly learn no one is going to see me. No one's going to care. Why would I voice my discomfort or my hunger or whatever it is? So this dovetails into what's called attachment theory. This may be familiar territory for some of you. Attachment theory was created by, his name's John Bowlby. He basically said that how our primary caregivers interact with us will influence how we expect the world and others to interact with us later in life. So if you have a caregiver who sees you, tends to your needs, cares about you, connects with you, not perfectly, because no caregivers can be perfect, but generally meeting a child's needs, that person will grow up and have a secure attachment. They will go about the world expecting that the world is generally an okay place, that people will generally care about them and treat them well. Versus people who develop insecure attachments. Attachment theory is going to say people can develop basically an avoidant, anxious, or disorganized insecure attachment style. And these are formed when a child does not have a caregiver who tends to them and connects and is attuned to their needs. And so they go out through the rest of their life saying, I don't know how my needs are going to be met. I have to do it on my own, or I have to fight to feel loved and cherished, or just complete lack of trust. Like, so for Sophia's case, she just has zero trust that anyone is going to actually care or love her in any way, because she never was given that example and created an insecure attachment style. So a traumatic childhood goes right along with this, right? Insecure attachments can often be paired with traumatic childhoods, or what's called CPTSD, complex PTSD. This is basically ongoing trauma that occurs. So instead of a single incident that happens, it's a lot more complex because it's woven within someone's day-to-day experience, oftentimes growing up. And again, these things create this foundation of how we move forward into the rest of our lives and how we expect and receive and interpret different examples or things that happen in our lives. So take, for example, someone who has a workplace where they feel devalued. I have a dear friend of mine who recently lost their dad. It was super unexpected, was diagnosed with cancer, and a few weeks later, the dad had already died. Like, it was very abrupt. And my friend works in a mental health clinic, and this clinic was basically like, oh, we're sorry, that happens. You can take a couple days off. Like, it was just like very like, basically, we're still going to expect you to do X, Y, and Z. Like, just did not really see my friend well. So my friend quit. And just was like, you're not valuing me as a person in this moment. You're seeing me instead for just my productivity, what I can offer you. And so I'm not going to stick around. To which I look at and I'm like, secure attachment, right? That's somebody who is entering into their life and saying, like, I deserve to be valued and seen. And when I'm not treated that way, it stands out to me, like, this feels wrong. Versus take Sophia, who for a long time worked at a law office doing like administrative stuff, and had this boss that week after week she would come in and be like he's just so upset with me. It feels like he's taking out everything on me. And she was so, from her perception, he was treating her very poorly, this boss was. And yet in her mind, it gets internalized. And she's like, oh, what am I doing wrong? Like, he clearly is just like, I must just not be doing good enough in this job. Like, and versus being able to say, this doesn't feel right. I should be being treated better. But instead, her foundation that she has says, this is how you're treated. So you kind of have to accept it. all right? So we all have a foundation. Ideally, we have a good foundation, right? That we can enter into the world believing that we matter. That's the foundation we were given. As we go on in life, we are bound to have interactions where we feel less valued. I worked in the restaurant world for many years, and as a server, there are countless stories of times that I felt like I didn't matter, right? Ask anyone in customer service. Tangent, but I was actually at a store on Monday, and like aisles away, overheard this customer just laying into this cashier, like going at it. Like, you're just horrible at your job, you're rude, you're mean, you're like, just kept going. And I walk up there, and it's this like 18-year-old gal, like, who's like clearly, visibly just like, what is going on? And she's like, I can help you, and calls me over, because this woman isn't even at her register. She's like over at a different register yelling at her. And I go up there, and I'm like, I'm so sorry you're having to experience this. And she's like, I'm literally shaking, like, I don't get it. Like, she was just so, my blood boils when I think about it. And this woman's like, what's your name? Like, trying to, like, I'm sure, like, report her, right? And I usually don't interject myself in ways like this, but I ended up emailing the store and saying, hey, just in case if this customer reaches out, I want you to know I was also a customer that was there at the time. And she provided great customer service to me, just trying to provide an alternative reaction. And maybe it's because my mind's been extra thinking about this topic, but I'm like, how devalued that woman was trying to make this poor cashier feel, right? Anyway, all that to say, some point in our lives, we experience something that feels devaluing. And sometimes it's just strangers, like those examples. Other times it's our close relationships. Maybe it's because we're just missing each other, whether it's parent-child or partners or friends. That just happens. We miss one another occasionally. Or maybe it's because we're tending to our own self and we don't have the capacity to love our loved ones well. Whatever the reason is, we have these experiences. The foundation we have, though, will determine whether or not those things really stick, or if it's easier for us to kind of let them go. So with Sophia, I use the example of a helicopter landing. That's the image I tend to use with her, where she has this massive helicopter landing that says, I don't matter. And so when things are happening in her life, there's plenty of room for things to land that encourage this sense of I don't matter. Meanwhile, she has a very, very, very little landing pad that was developed by an extended relative who saw her and loved her unconditionally. It's like the one person in her childhood that actually made her feel valued. And so he helped create this very little landing pad. And so as she goes about her life, she'll have people all the time say, oh, like, you're so wonderful, you're so great, and all the things I just shared about her. And rarely do those things land because there's just not much space to hold that. Versus she goes through her life and has these ongoing moments of interactions with people who make her feel less valued, and there's plenty of space for her internal self to receive those messages. That makes sense? Yeah. So, we're doing great in time. So how do we prioritize mattering? We're going to shift now to that second part of more practically, how do we care for our internal selves, as well as how do we externally care for those around us? And both are important. Just like I was saying, if someone has a large landing pad of I don't matter, we can love them all we want, but until they do that internal work, until we do that internal work, it's going to be hard to actually receive that affirmation and that love from others. Vice versa, if someone has a great foundation, but are put in a setting that just continues to devalue them over and over and over again, it's only a matter of time until that foundation starts shaking. It's just that we can only endure so much, right? It's part of why, personally, I I will work with people who have trauma later on, like they're processing it later on, but I don't work with young kids who are in it and in that trauma. I'm grateful I have coworkers who will, but for me, it's so hard to try to do that work of helping a kid feel valued, only to send them back to a family who's speaking otherwise, right? Like, oh, it's so heartbreaking. So for kids, but also for all of us, we have to do both of those things. We need both the internal and the external to be at play. So the internal work, I cringe to think about me putting the internal work into a single slide. So by no means is this exhaustive. It's just a few ideas for us to consider as we think about what can we do to make sure that we feel valued within our own selves. First of all, how we think about ourselves matters. How we talk to ourselves makes such a difference. There's a concept called negativity bias, which basically is this idea that our brains are hardwired to see the negative. It's a really useful tool if you're in a space that's not safe, right? We scan an environment, and in a split second, we can see what's dangerous, what's a risk, all of that. When we're in a safe environment, which I would argue many of us probably are, negativity bias instead just plays out with us having a great day at work, but we had one interaction that was bad, and then we ruminate on that interaction instead all night long, right? Our brains want to just cling to those negative things. It's thought that those negative things, again, take a split second to be stored inside of our memory, versus positive things take at least 12 seconds of pondering on them in order to actually store it within our memory. And so this is a shout out for the idea of gratitude practices, right? That's kind of often thrown out as kind of the soft thing, but truly to stop and wonder about what you're grateful for and to ponder on those good things for at least 12 seconds will allow your brain to realize, like, oh, there are good things. And when we think about the topic of mattering, the same goes true. When we receive negative, a sense of lack of value from others, our brains will cling to that quickly. Versus if we receive compliments, we're a lot quicker to just kind of brush them off, right? And so to be mindful of giving yourself a period of time to savor those compliments or to savor those interactions where people love us and cherish us and show us that we matter will help cultivate internally this sense of mattering within us. Shame versus guilt. This gets more at how we talk to ourselves and the language we use internally. So there's the researcher Brene Brown, if she's a familiar name. I see a lot of nods. She's fantastic. If you haven't read her, then if you take one thing from tonight, go read Brene Brown. She's great. She's done a lot of work around shame and the impact of shame. So to give a very brief understanding, guilt is going to say, I did something bad. Guilt is actually a helpful emotion. We should feel guilt. When my 4-year-old hits her sister, hypothetically, right? When she hits her sister, I want her to feel guilty. She should feel guilt. She should not be hitting her sister. Guilt can be helpful. It spurs on a sense of change. I'm going to do it differently next time. I did something bad is guilt. Shame is going to say, I am bad, right? Hear that distinction, it's big. I did something bad versus I am bad. Shame makes these overarching statements about who we are. So in the example of my 4-year-old, shame is going to say, you're bad for hitting your sister, or you're a bad sister, which, what does a bad sister do? Hits her sister, right? And so it's only going to well, if I'm just a bad sister, then why not just keep hitting my sister? That's what I do if I'm a bad sister. See how that really keeps you in that same spot. So when people are feeling these deep-held beliefs of, I am unworthy, I am not enough, I do not matter, I don't have value. Those are shame statements that we make about ourselves. And so it's just to be very, very mindful of how we speak to ourselves, and I'll get at in just a moment how we also speak to others, right? But are we using shame language, or are we giving ourselves permission to say, yeah, and sometimes I do things that may not be good, and that does not need to speak to who I am. So the good news is our brains are very adaptable. Neuroplasticity, we were just talking about this beforehand. Our brains have the ability to be molded and to change. That's the good news. You think of a kid, and man, they're just constantly learning new things, right? It's why kids can learn languages so quickly. Their brains are just like an open, like blank slate for everything. As we get older, those neural pathways, those ways of thinking, get a little more smoothed out. I like to use the image of a trail in the woods to describe this. You walk down a trail time and time again, and it's going to get smoothed over. That does not mean you can't make a new trail, though. So in a kid's mind, it's like just an open field. Like, it's easy to make trails anywhere. As we get older, the forest is growing up a little more and is getting thicker, and so it takes more work to do that, and yet it's still very possible. You're just going to have to, clear your way through. But every time you go down that new path, it's going to get smoother and smoother and smoother and easier to go that way. Likewise, when you stop going down those old paths that may not be serving you or helping you, may be that way of shame or I don't matter, whatever it is, as you stop going down those old paths, it's like the weeds start growing up, and the little saplings are coming up, and eventually that way of thinking is no longer as appealing. With that said, I want to be very mindful that we can't always just think our way out of these deeply held beliefs. If people could just think their way out of it, I wouldn't have a lot of my clients, right? Like we would have done it otherwise if it was simply that easy. That doesn't mean it's not important to pay attention to how we speak and think about ourselves, and yet oftentimes we need so much more. This internal work is not meant to be done alone. As Susan even mentioned about the crisis of loneliness, right? We're becoming less and less connected with others, and it is through relationships that we often find so much healing. It's also through relationships that we also usually experience suffering, and it's where we find that healing. And so to consider finding relationships in your life and places where you feel seen and valued, to lean into those relationships and allow them to see you vulnerably and say, oh, you are good. No matter what you do, you're good, right? And to have those people in our lives who are just unashamedly in our corner. Whether that, I hope you all have at least one person that comes to mind where you're like, yep, that's how they think of me, right? And hopefully you have more than one. And hopefully we're creating communities like a church that can provide that for people as well. It's also our relationship with God can be a great example of this, to connect with God and believe, hopefully you believe that God sees you and unconditionally loves you and sees value in you. Unfortunately, not everyone gets to hold that. We'll talk about that in a moment of the theology we offer people. And yet, hopefully, people can view their relationship with God as a way of healing these parts that may feel less valued. And then healing that foundation. I'm biased as a therapist. I think therapy is great. I think we could all benefit from it and grow in that. And yet therapy isn't the only way either, but to pay attention to when these negative beliefs are stored so deeply within us and stored in our bodies and in our nervous systems. Again, cognitive thoughts may not get us there. And so to find avenues of healing that go beyond just the brain and instead do more somatic work or finding these ways of healing the nervous system as well. The book The Body Keeps the Score. I don't have that on the list. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk is an incredible resource on how the body keeps the score, how the body stores trauma and these negative beliefs. Heavy and dense, just forewarning if you choose to read it, and yet is a great resource. He offers all of these different clinical ways to go about healing those negative beliefs and cognitions within ourselves, as well as non-clinical ways like theater and dance and so many cool things that can help heal those parts of us. But to seek out additional healing if your foundation or your landing pad is quite large in regards to not feeling like you have value. And then last, finding meaning in our actions. Again, not exhaustive list, just the last one I'm going to offer. To remind ourselves that, again, we are made in the image of God, and that in itself is enough, right? It's not about what we do. And we are created in the image of a God who is creative. And so to acknowledge that we also find meaning within ourselves when we give ourselves to the world in some way. And so to find avenues. I know many of you are lay ministers, right? What an incredible avenue to offer back to the world something. And in that process, that creates your own sense of meaning and mattering within your own self, let alone then helps others likewise. Yeah. All right, turning to the external. What does it mean to help others feel like they matter? So as I already mentioned, Sophia had an extended relative who just adored her as a kid. And that one individual truly is the reason she's alive. And I don't say that lightly. Like, his voice is what allows her sometimes to continue on. And so to not underestimate the impact that we can have, especially with kids who are still forming that foundation, but also later on to be able to continue to speak and hopefully expand people's small little landing pads that feel like they matter, to confirm to them, like, no, there is a part of you that gets to believe you're valuable no matter what. And so it's an incredible opportunity that we all have to foster a sense of valuing within other people in our lives. So I'm going to encourage us to pay attention to how we think, talk, and treat. I didn't mean to make them all T's, but it's really, it sounds nice, right? So how we think about others, how we talk to and talk about others, and then how we treat others are things to be paying attention to. So to start with, how we think. Immediately my mind goes to the Sermon on the Mount, and you see Jesus' example of saying, you think this is murder, but actually if you think this way, it's considered murder. Or you think this is adultery, but actually if you think this way about someone, it's adultery, right? Thoughts are significant. How we think about other people is where it starts. And if those thoughts are unchecked, they will lead to how we speak and how we act towards others. I think of this, again, how social evils are done. It starts with the thoughts, right? It starts with saying this group of people is less than this group. Racism, sexism, ableism, all of these ways of thinking in the world starts with this sense of, I have value, you do not, right? Sophia is in a job, a field of work that is still predominantly led by men or viewed as work for men. And so she has to step forward and fight for her sense of value within her workplace. I didn't mention it, but Sophia is also a woman of color. And so she also has to step forward and fight for a sense of value compared to the white person next to her, right? And how, as a societal level, these ways that it pulls and tears down people's foundations when they're constantly having to fight up against societal expectations or perceptions of them, right? And so we've been talking a lot about individual levels, and yet this topic does have implications for larger societal conversations as well. So this leads to our thoughts lead to how we talk to and talk about others. And I want to make a distinction between those. Let's use the example of a teenager who overhears their parents saying, like, oh, so-and-so's kid isn't going to college. They're probably just gonna meander around, end up working at McDonald's, or whatever it is, right? Just an example. That teen can overhear their parents talk about someone else that way, and one, either internalize it and think, oh, I better make sure that I go to college, otherwise my parents aren't gonna think I'm as important, right? Or it perpetuates this sense of yeah, that kid isn't gonna do anything with their life, right? It perpetuates seeing a lack of value in others. So to pay attention how we talk about others, also in the church, we have a lot of room, I think, to focus and learn how we talk about others, both within the church and outside of the church. Again, we'll get to that in just a moment. Get ahead of myself. So that's talking about others, but also talking to others. Again, are we using shame language? I think our culture loves shaming people. That might be an overstatement. But you look at things like cancel culture, for example, where it's just oh, this is who you are out, right? There's this tendency that we have to just make overarching statements about people and their identities. And so if we are not first and foremost seeing people as wonderfully and fearfully made in the image of God, then we are doing something wrong. We can still have guilt. Again, guilt can be good. We're not just excusing all behavior, and yet to be mindful of how we talk about people and to make sure we are not sliding into the language of shame, and instead viewing them as beautifully made, even if there are things that are discouraging at times, and things that people should be held accountable for. And then last, how we treat others. Again, thoughts lead to language, and language often leads to action. And so to be mindful of how we act, and do our actions make people feel like they matter? Do our actions show that people matter enough to spend unhurried time with, right? For those of you who are lay ministers, especially when you go and visit someone, can you be in an unhurried pace, right? Where you just get to be with them, and that you say, you matter to me enough to spend part of my day with, right? Or do they matter enough to be believed when they say that they're uncomfortable or worried about something, right? Can you say, oh, I believe you, that's how you're feeling? Do they matter enough to have that action? Do they matter enough to be fed and kept warm and clothed, right? These basic needs. Because if not, we are speaking to a lack of value. If we say, it doesn't really matter or not if you're, warm tonight, well, that's us speaking value or a lack of value over them, right? Our actions make a difference. So we've been talking a lot about this in, again, personal relationships, internally within us, but also interpersonally. But this does make a difference in other settings as well. So I'm just going to touch briefly on schools, workplaces, and the church. So schools, it's called the Mattering Movement. It's an organization that works with parents and students and teachers, and their goal is to, quote, untangle self-worth from achievement. Isn't that beautiful? To untangle self-worth from achievement. And again, not that teenagers throughout all past generations haven't felt this pressure to succeed, but there's a lot of it right now for kids, where it's basically, if you're not X, Y, and Z, you're not as valuable. And again, the schools aren't going to say that, and yet they're going to say the most valuable student is the one who has great grades, or the kids who are really good at athletics are seen as valuable in this school, or the college acceptance rates, or whatever it may be, speaks to students' about their own value. And if they don't live up to that, well, then you internalize, I'm less valuable than, whoever down the hallway. So to untangle self-worth from achievement, I think is just beautiful. The Mattering movement, they have a ton of incredible resources on their website. So if this is an area of interest to consider how Mattering impacts schools, I'd encourage you to check out their resources. Workplaces. Again, this is a push in workplaces to see the importance of Mattering. There is one study that found that a high level of belonging and feeling valued in the workplace was, get this, linked with 56% increase in job performance, 50% drop in turnover risk, 75% reduction in sick days. And the study estimated that for a 10,000 person company, this would result in an annual savings of more than $52 million. So, while yes, we should value people because they're actually valuable, and I hope that organizations would do that just because they think their employees matter, there's also a huge benefit, and it has this ripple effect when we say, no, you matter in this organization, you matter in this company, and it'll be worth it to the organization and to the workplaces to start valuing employees more. There's some places who have like unlimited sick days or unlimited leave now. Companies are starting to practice that. Yeah. And the idea is that usually when you offer that, people take less sick time. Like they feel valued. They're like, oh, my company cares enough that like if something comes up, cool. Like they're going to be okay with me having a complex life because hello, we're humans and we have complex lives, right? And by having that sense of value in employees, it leads to great outcomes. And so that leads us to here, the church, here in the church. And so I want to think about the church in light of the think, talk, and treat others, the 3 T's. So first of all, how we think in the church makes a difference. Our theology will make a difference. If we believe people are first and foremost, again, made in the beautiful image of God as beloved creations, that will inform then how we talk about them and to them and how we treat them. Versus if our theology views people through a lens of shame instead of guilt, it will also impact how we understand them and how they understand themselves. So again, guilt and shame, this doesn't excuse all behaviors. It doesn't overlook the brokenness and the suffering in our world and the need for Jesus' saving grace, right? And can we move away from some of the shaming language that I think the church has often used with people, and specifically certain groups of people, so that they can find a safe place here within the church that where they feel loved and seen. So I started kind of diving straight in there with how we talk, right? Because our theology impacts how we talk, whether it's from up on stage or how we talk to one another or how we talk about others, both in the church and out of the church, will also impact whether or not people feel valued and cared for within our congregations. And then last, how we treat them and how we act as the church. Where is our time and our resources going? Again, this is why I love that St. Philip cares about things like this, right? It's you're proving what you value as a congregation by how you spend your time and your resources. And what ministries do you prioritize as a community? That all speaks to what you value and who you value. Likewise, on your door, I'm going to butcher it, but it says, all are welcome here, right? Who you invite in the door, or maybe more importantly, who are you hesitant to see come through the door? Are there certain types of people where you're more hesitant to see them come in for whatever reason? All of that, as a church, our actions speak and make a difference in how people feel valued or not. So to conclude, to consider Jesus' example, right? When you look at the New Testament and how Jesus interacted with people, Jesus stopped and saw people. Jesus prioritized. The story of the woman who's bleeding comes to mind, right? Where Jesus is on an urgent mission to go save a little girl from death, and yet Jesus stops. He pauses and he says, "Oh, who touched me?" And values that woman enough to pause and to heal her and praise her faith, really, right? And the New Testament, again, is filled with stories of this, of Jesus seeing people and valuing them. And so for us to wonder, likewise, what does it mean for us in our context here and now to follow Jesus' example in that way? So that concludes my initial thoughts. I think we still have time for some questions and answers, as well as, right, Susan?
Does anyone have any questions that you'd like? Here, I'll grab this so that we can hear you. I hope.
Who is the author of The Body Keeps Score?
Yep, Bessel van der Kolk.
Bessel.
Yep, it's a Dutch name. Van, V-A-N, Der, D-E-R-K-O-L-K.
And I have that book, but not here in my office right now, but if you want to see it. There are other resources also on the back table, some of them that she's recommended, some of them we will get. I don't know if is Valerie still here? Valerie might have the Now One book, the Adam. Oh, she just walked out. Yeah. So, any other questions? I think we learned a lot. Did you all learn a lot? I think she did a great job. It was very thorough, and it was what I really was hoping for. Yep, and we will work on the floss in a second. I will give her a little bit of time to rest her voice, and thank Casey for coming. Thank you, Casey. It was awesome. And I hope you continue doing this talk for other churches. So everybody's curious about the piece of floss. I just want to point out our epidemic of loneliness and isolation. There's a copy back there, and you can also look it up on your computer. And it's only 86 pages, I think. 81 pages. And also back there is building your coping toolbox, and that is really good. It has mood boosters, addressing your basic needs. So if you're having kind of funky, if you're not feeling right, if you're depressed or anxious, these are different ways, and I call them grounding techniques also. I don't know if you would call them that as a therapist. Processing your feelings is another way. Volunteering acts of kindness, as she said, doing things kind to other people or valuing other people. Problem-solving hobbies, stress reliever, relaxation exercises, and asking for help. They're all on this sheet if anybody wants to get some out there or at any of the hospitality desks. And, oh shoot, I dropped my piece of floss. I don't know what I did with it. It's probably laying around here somewhere. But, oh, thank you. Also, her resources are in the back of your book. She does not have the one about the Body Keeps Score. I do have that one at home. It's a great book, but and there is a kind of a cheat sheet to go with it, a little workbook you can do. So those are all in the back of your thing, so that's helpful. And I'm just going to read you a little poem called We Rise Higher Together by Joe Davis. I read a poem from him earlier today for my lay ministers. I don't know if you guys liked it or not, but I thought it was great. So, we rise higher together, a reminder of what's possible together. Life is better when we rise together. There are possibilities only realized together. With your help, I rise higher than myself. United, we reach higher than ever. We can climb on our own, but we climb ever higher when we're not climbing alone. We are not self-taught. We are community taught. We are not independent. We are interdependent. I am because we are. And everything we are is because someone loved us into existence. The world has more than enough to share, and all of it was meant for us. And if what we carry is too much to bear, then others can lift us up. Together, more can be done. Together, there's more to become. Everyone wants their time to shine, but the sun shines on everyone. We shine brighter when we shine together. We rise higher when we raise others. Together we weather any storm, to gather a rainbow of colors. We can't have collective healing without the collective when our well-being is interconnected. Can we rise to our highest intention? Can we rise to love's highest expression? Together we rise higher than what holds us down, to common, higher, holy ground. Together we rise higher, like words from the page to the world stage, like the smoke of a Palo Santo or sage. Together we rise higher than the muck and the mire. We rise even higher than crumbling empires. Together we rise higher, like voices in the choir, like sunflowers and sunfire. If we fall or forget, we'll be each other's reminder until we're so high that our souls fly. Together we'll rise higher and fly higher until we rise close to the Most High. I love that poem. And so we get to go to our floss from that. We talk about being connected and rise higher. With your floss, there's several strands together. Take off just one little strand, if you can do that. So I got two. So take off your one little strand. Try and break it. It's pretty easy to break, isn't it? Now go back to the strand that there should be about 5 left in here. If you go back to that strand, try and break it. You can't. So when you're connected with other people, we're stronger and we can rise higher. And that's what we need to do. What does the Bible say about togetherness? Matthew 18:20, for where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am with them, or I am among them. Like the flimsy embroidery floss we just looked at, we're not navigating the world alone at all with our flimsy human strength. The triune God journeys with us. And all of us. Even with only a few people together for a church gathering, Jesus is among us because there's 2 or more. So let's end with the prayer. Thank you, God, for our time together. We know and feel your presence among us. Together we'll rise higher and fly higher until we rise close to you, the Most High. Amen. Thanks for coming. Thanks for anybody watching online, and thanks for anybody going to watch online. And does anybody know how the wolves are doing? Well, we'll find out. And thank you so much, Casey, for coming. We appreciate what she shared. And go out and be the ripple out into the community, into the world, to spread these ideas of valuing and talk about how you can make other people value. There is some books some papers on the VIA, different characteristics that are valued in people, and you can speak to people as having those characteristics that will make them feel more valued. They're out there on the mental health table out there. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you, sir.